Hello, I'm the Kali Crusader. I have seen Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, and I have some thoughts. Before we begin, I will say that this isn't a complete breakdown or analysis of the film. I would rather save that for if and when I take more detailed notes of the film, possibly when the film is released to DVD or Blu-ray, and I can go back and pick up stuff that I either missed or misinterpreted. I'm also not sure if this film will have an extended version like the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, so there is a chance that new scenes will provide more information that may have an impact on the overall quality of the film for better or for worse. Having said that, I am well aware that this film is based on the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, specifically the story of Helm Hammerhand. I have done some research on this story, and I will say that as an adaptation, this film does not live up to my standards. I understand changes are made between written works and films. Changes were made for the original film trilogy, yet it is still considered a masterpiece and loved by many people, including me. I prefer adaptations that try to stay as close to the source material as possible, and adaptations that manage to capture the spirit of the original work. This film, because of the changes that it made on top of its additions, is indeed different from the source material, but more importantly, I believe it does not capture nor live up to the spirit that lives in the world Tolkien crafted. If anything, I'd argue it is soulless and hollow, an attempt to thrive and piggyback ride on the success of The Lord of the Rings as an IP, as is the unfortunate case for many IPs in modern entertainment. Now, how does the film stand on its own when not tethered to the Lord of the Rings IP? If I'm being generous to the film overall, I think it is a 5 or 6 at best. The annoying part is that I think the film could have been better with a few tweaks here and there.
Forgive me, my lords.
In general, Hera, the protagonist of the film, was not terrible or insufferable. After seeing the trailers and hearing the news surrounding the film, I will admit I had my fears about her character. However, after watching the film, she didn't come off as narcissistic or vile in any way, not like some other modern characters I've seen. Some of the critiques and thoughts I've seen have said she does come off as bland and boring, which is the general way they describe the film as well. I definitely see where they are coming from, and maybe I just have a stronger stomach for bland and boring things. Overall, she's not a character who will leave a lasting impression, but she didn't leave a bitter or bad taste in my mouth. If I were to compare her to food, she's like plain oatmeal, fine enough to eat, but nothing remarkable. I think the main problem with the film itself is the plot. There are parts in the film that felt rather contrived, and you could definitely see the writers pulling some strings to achieve certain outcomes. I'm going to go into spoilers and do the best that I can to go from memory in a chronological order to give some examples of what I mean. The first bit of major contrivance occurs towards the end of the scene with the Rabbin Mumakil. The scene in question did have some things I'd like to comment on first, though. For instance, the scene does require a good bit of luck and conveniences to function, which I don't mind inherently in a story as long as they don't start piling up. It's lucky Hera manages to find a horn on the dead mercenary that is able to get the Mumakil's attention to save Freylof, a character who I actually kind of liked in the movie, although Helm is probably the best character overall. And it's lucky Hera remembered there is a Kraken monster in the forest, because remember the Watcher? I believe the writers intended to show Hera as being resourceful in order to take the Mumakil down, which I think is perfectly fine. I do find it funny, though, that after throwing her spear to wake the Kraken, that the Mumakil is able to silently sneak up on her like it's a ninja or something. Who would have thought a big rabid Mumakil would be able to sneak around so quietly? Anyways, the bit of contrivance that comes at the end of the scene is when the general of Wolf's army, who I believe is named Targ, shows up and kidnaps Hera and takes her to Isengard. They're taking Hera to Isengard. They're taking Hera to Isengard, to Isengard, to Isengard. Guard. Sorry. So, question. How did Targ find Hera? He said he was sent out on a mission, and I think we're meant to infer that it was to kidnap her, but it's just rather lucky for him that she ran into the same area he was in while dealing with the Mumakil. It's like he arrived precisely when he means to, but wait, how can that be? He's not a wizard. Another contrivance happens just a bit later after Hera escapes Isengard with the help of her handmaid Olwen and Freylof, and when Wolf's army shows up at Edoras. Hera and Olwen are looking on at the battle when the page boy trips and drops the written pledges the lords made to Helm. And when Hera comes over to help pick them up, she sees the sigil of Lorn Thorn, also known as the totally obvious traitor, and she remembers seeing the same sigil on a scroll while being held captive at Isengard. It's lucky that the page boy came along carrying these pledges and tripped near Hera, otherwise she wouldn't have deduced Thorn was a traitor. However, after giving it some thought, this contrivance also reveals a bigger issue. See, earlier in the film, before Freka arrives at Edoras to talk to Helm, the same page boy is going over a list of sigils to remember, and Hera points out the one for the Shield Maidens, despite the scroll appearing to have been burnt, thus removing the name. This would infer that Hera has some knowledge of the sigils and who they're associated with. This begs the question, did she legit not remember Thorn's sigil, or did the writers make her forget so that the reveal of Thorn's treachery would be a surprising twist? The truth is, I predicted the twist from a mile away. The way he acted, especially during the pre-battle council with Helm, where he promised to pledge his soldiers, just screamed traitor. So not only does it damage Hera as a character to have her forget Thorn's sigil, but it's unnecessary in the grand scheme of things.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The writers could have easily just had Thorn turn traitor to the shock of everyone. The only thing I believe the whole sigil reveal accomplishes is that it makes Hera evacuate Edoras. On the one hand, I like that she does care for her people. For instance, before the final battle at the Hornburg, when the people are preparing to flee through the secret passage, she interacts with some kids who are scared and ensures them they'll be safe. And it's small interactions like that that do say something about her as a person. It's just a reminder that characters aren't just defined by what they say, but also by the actions they take. However, on the other hand, the evacuation of Edoras, I believe, makes for a missed opportunity. If Thorn's betrayal wasn't revealed by the sigil shenanigans, the writers could have used it as a way to impact Helm. Have the people still in Edoras when it is besieged by Wolf, have them fleeing for their lives while the wild men attack and even kill some of them. Kind of like that scene in the Two Towers where that village is being attacked and people are fleeing. Such an event could have weighed on Helm and added to his grief, making his later line about how he failed hit a bit more deeply. Unfortunately, that is not what we got, and it is frustrating because, again, I think the film would be better with just a few tweaks to the plot. To me, there were just opportunities the writers could have explored, but oh well. While we're on the Battle of Edoras, there is one bit that I would like to discuss, and that is the younger brother's choice to ride his old mare. For the battle, it is set up that his mare is old, and Hera offers her horse, which he refuses. This choice ultimately results in his death, since the old mare can't keep up with the others during the retreat. In watching Peter Jackson's Two Towers, you get a sense that the people of Rohan have a deep respect for their horses. The horse is incorporated into their architecture, their weapons, and their banners. Overall, the horse is indeed an integral part of Rohan's culture, so it might be plausible for the riders of Rohan to form special bonds with their mounts. With that in mind, I can believe the brother would not want to part from his horse so readily. If memory serves, I believe he says the old mare has carried him into battle before. Therefore, it's possible his bond with his horse is something he doesn't wish to sever, even if it is ill-advised. To draw in real life, we often do this with old pets. We love them, we connect with them, and we don't want that bond to end, despite time and age saying otherwise. Having said that, the old mare is not going on a happy trot through the countryside, a more fitting situation given her age. She is going into battle, which I think is a silly choice, since having an old mare and a cavalry unit on a battlefield is asking for trouble. In truth, if there is indeed a bond between the brother and old mare, I believe it would be more likely that he would not ride her into battle. More than likely, he would choose a younger and more battle-ready mount and retire the old girl. You could even have a scene reminiscent of Aragorn letting Brago go, with the brother saying she has seen enough war. It would be a little on the nose with those exact words, but I think it would be the best choice overall. You could also go even further with the old mare as a symbol if the brother chose to retire her. Perhaps the brother still dies during the battle. The old mare could shortly die afterwards while the people of Rohan are taking shelter in the Hornburg during the bitter winter. With the horse being an integral part of Rohan's culture, the old mare's passing could come to symbolize the end of an era for Rohan's people. She can come to symbolize the people who have fallen upon dark times and those who have been brought to their lowest. Kind of like that torn flag that flies away in the wind and falls to the ground in the Two Towers. As it stands, though, the brother's choice to ride the old mare is just a means means to an end. It's a way for the writers to conveniently have him captured and killed. Although I admire the brother's bond with his horse, I feel like we could have gotten something better. But oh well. Going back to Helm Hammerhand, there is a scene I would like to discuss, and it is his death scene, which is a scene that is either going to make or break the film for a lot of people. I know it did for Shad over at Shadiversity, and he has his own review of the film if you would like to check it out. I think he was pretty fair with his critiques in regards to the film and this scene, but I'd like to provide some thoughts of my own. So, for starters, the scene comes about because Hera stumbles into a secret passage in the Hornburg that leads her outside. The door won't open back the other way, and she sees her father. Thus, she follows him outside. It does seem rather contrived. The door just locks itself, essentially pushing her in one direction. Then, during an encounter with some orcs, don't worry, I'll get to that, Helm drops in to save her. However, while fighting the beast orcs had with them, the beast throws a stone that I believe blocks the passage. We get a reaction from Hera saying no, and we get a later line when the people are preparing to evacuate that the soldiers need to go and unblock the passage for them. Therefore, it seems rather unlucky for Helm and Hera that passage is blocked to begin with, and that Wolf and the Wildmen heard the commotion, forcing them to make a break for the gate. Then, on top of that, the gate is frozen, forcing Helm and Hera to pry open the gate. Helm opens it just enough for Hera to slip through, but he doesn't open it further and decides to close it. Now, to be as generous to the film as possible, the Wildmen are coming, albeit a bit slowly, and the gate was already hard to open, just enough for Hera to slip through. I think a sliding door that has been afflicted with ice would be a bit sticky and hard to slide open. Even when it is being closed by Helm, it does seem to take a moment. If the gate had been opened wider and Helm had slipped through, I believe there could have been a risk of the Wildmen exploiting this open window of opportunity to attack and slip inside. Even so, the Wildmen are not rushing the gate and are slowly edging towards it, possibly because of the blizzard conditions. Had they been rushing it though, I think the scene would have been better, since Helm and Hera would have been crunched for time. There is also the issue that the defenders at the gate aren't helping their king and princess.
Right? Right? No!
Even if the blizzard conditions had hindered the loosing of arrows, I think even a volley or two aimed at the general vicinity of the Wildmen on the bridge would have slowed them down further. As it stands, I believe the scene could have been tweaked to really sell us on this being Helm's last stand. However, with the contrivance of the secret passageway being shut, forcing Helm and Hera to run to the gate along with how slow the Wildmen attack, this scene does not work for me on a mechanical level.
But we're not even finished.
Now, there is also a meta issue with this scene as well, one that I believe Shad addresses in his review of the scene that ruins it for him. It is clear the writers wanted Helm to make his last stand and die so Hera could be propped up as the leader. In a better executed scene in a different universe that is not Middle-earth, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with this. However, seeing this is an adaptation of a story from Middle-earth, one that puts more focus on Helm's daughter rather than on Helm himself, I can see why some people are against this. That being said, I would rather focus on the story rather than on things outside the story, even if they do have an influence. So, on top of plot issues, I'd like to briefly talk about some creative decisions that were made that I found to be a bit weird. First off, the inclusion of the orcs looking around for rings. I think there was a plot beat in the Hobbit trilogy that Sauron was collecting the rings of power, like the dwarf rings and whatnot. However, I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning is, nor if this is something that happened in the lore. Overall, this to me felt like a forced mandate. It's like someone thought it wouldn't be a Lord of the Rings movie without orcs or the mention of rings. The inclusion feels rather pointless in the grand scheme of the movie, and only serves as a way to name-drop Gandalf at the end of the film when he wants to see Hera and inquire about the orcs. How did he find out about the orcs? I don't know. He just did, and I'm not sure if this is meant to be a setup for future films where Hera goes on adventures with her handmaid and Gandalf to fight orcs and such.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
At the end of the day, it just seems like an unnecessary addition. Writers could have easily have just replaced the orcs with random wildmen trying to scavenge for food or something. As for the final battle, I did like some bits and bobs about it. For one thing, and credit to Shadiversity for pointing it out, Hera does use her shield to disarm Wolf in a neat way that's apparently historically accurate. I also kind of like the fact that she is using a shield, because shields are awesome. However, I have to admit the Siege Tower Bridge was pretty stupid. I think this is part of a problem in modern entertainment where basic siege tactics like ladder rushing and grappling hooks are sidelined for more showy and unique tactics in order to be different. Honestly, I think that bridge should have just broken completely because of the way it was deployed. I wouldn't be bothered by it so much if they didn't manipulate how the Deeping Wall looks. According to the narrator, the story takes place 200 years before Bilbo found the One Ring. I'm not sure if the people of Rohan filled the valley with dirt during the time between this story and the one in the Two Towers, but the Deeping Wall is depicted differently in this film than in the Two Towers. I conclude that this change was made to necessitate the use of the Siege Tower Bridge over the use of standard ladders like the Uruk-hai used.
But we're not even finished.
I do have a question. Does the deploying of the Siege Tower Bridge and its ability to remain in place so the Wildmen can get atop the wall make King Theoden a liar now?
No army has ever breached the Deeping Wall.
It's not technically a breach, but I believe Hera says the Wildmen are going to breach the wall when they do deploy the tower. But in the Two Towers, Theoden says no army has ever breached the wall.
No army has ever breached the Deeping Wall.
This might just be a goof on the writer's part for not using the right words. Hera could have just said they're going to mount our wall, or something like that. I don't know. I just thought that would be interesting to bring up. And now for the final duel between Hera and Wolf. Again, I do like the disarming move Hera pulls, and the fight in general doesn't do anything too crazy. An autopsy from Shad might say otherwise. However, at the end of their fight, when Freylof arrives to lift the siege and the wild men scatter, Wolf says that he knew she would be his doom, and goes in to attack her after striking her arm with a sneaky dagger throw. At first, it looks like he ran his sword through Hera, but it actually ends up beside her. When I first saw this, I thought Hera had stabbed him and that maybe Wolf had purposefully aimed his sword to miss so he could die on Hera's sword. I only thought this because of Wolf's line to Hera as well as Targ calling him a coward, and I thought that he planned to kill himself in a way that looked like he had died fighting.
Are you out of your mind?
I'll admit it was a crazy theory, one that was quickly disproven when the fight continued and he disarmed her. Only after Olwen gives Hera her shield and Hera overpowers Wolf and kills him by pressing on his throat does the fight end. Putting aside the sudden change in strength differences between Wolf and Hera, especially when said differences were established early in the fight, this end cemented Wolf as a pretty forgettable and lame antagonist. At first, there was promise in seeing him going on a quest for revenge for the death of his father Freka at the hands of Helm that essentially is the main conflict of the story. However, once Helm and his sons are dead, it just seems he only wants to kill Hera because she rejected him and didn't want to marry him. It's a shame because we could have gotten something better, but oh well. And I think that's my general take on War of the Rohirrim. I believe it's better than, say, Rings of Power, especially since the dialogue wasn't full of purple prose and it had more likable characters. However, that's like saying I prefer a tiny toot over a smelly wet fart. From what I'm observing, I figure the film will ultimately be forgotten like the passing of wind. I mean, when I went to watch the film in the theater, I only saw 2 people. I don't know if it was because it was the second showing on a Friday afternoon or something else, but for comparison, I went to see Spy Family Code White a couple of months back, and more people showed up to that even though it was still a pretty meager crowd. You can interpret that information however you want.
You think this computes over here?
Overall, while I did find some things to like about the film and enjoyed it overall as a popcorn flick, it's a film that ultimately disappointed me on an objective level because of how the plot played out on its own. It gets more disappointing when you remember that this is meant to be a story that takes place in the Lord of the Rings universe, specifically the Peter Jackson version. The only thing the name drops, member berries, and references that were sprinkled throughout this film did was remind me of how much more I like the original trilogy. Even the music score, which heavily used the Rohan popcorn theme from the original trilogy was just another reminder. As for the animation, I thought it was alright, and there were some visuals I did like, especially this one shot of the Great Hall in Edoras, with all the stars sitting above it during the first act of the film. I could see myself using that shot as a background on my laptop. However, visuals are only a part of the film. At the end of the day, the story is what matters. If you're a normie kind of like me, looking for a generic action fantasy popcorn flick with some neat visuals, you might enjoy the film, but you might be better off looking elsewhere if you want a more engaging story. Might I recommend the original trilogy? As for fans who have a deep love for Tolkien's work and who have more knowledge on its lore, you are most likely not going to like this film. There may come a day when I watch this film again, when I'm either bored with nothing else to watch, or if I need something mediocre to remove something far fouler from my mind, but it is not this day. Until next time, I bid you farewell, people of the internet. Take care.
Is there someone else up there we can talk to?
No, now go away or I shall taunt you a second time.